So we are really thankful for both Abunas to be with us, and we are so happy to have them. And may God bless their service, and always they come and bless us with their presence. We are really happy to have every one of you. Welcome to Wisconsin and welcome to Chicago. And God willing, you have a blessed and joyful weekend with us, and you'll go back home charged with all the spiritual blessing from both Abunas. Thank you all for coming.
We should be clapping for you because you came early and you're awake so far. So we want to keep the trend very good. We'll just introduce, actually this topic is one of my favorites. We're actually trying to do something like this several years ago in a different context, but at least I think now this year is appropriate for many reasons. And especially in this weekend, as you know, which we have been expecting for several months. And we have a lot to talk about. So we don't want to delay it further. Thanks, of course, also to Abuna Pablos for joining us. He always encourages us and gives us his wisdom. We're trying to ask him to share in one of the lectures, but because of his humility, you'll have to bear with us for the time. As you know already, the topic, we said that we're speaking about, in this topic, mainly leadership. You didn't understand from the catchy title. So someone once said that the essence of leadership is going out ahead to show the way, and thus the person will see more clearly, so they will lead others. So we'll talk about five lectures about different points. We call them about the ABCs of leadership. And the lectures will basically be as follows. So we'll talk about today and this evening that Christ is the model example for all leadership. And this will apply to not people only in executive positions, but also as within the family, as leadership within the family, within the church, within the workplace, within the school, within life in general. Christ's model, as we will see in a short while, how he is the model that leads us, as we were just saying a few moments ago, and how we also will take that characteristic of his to lead others to his kingdom. Then tomorrow morning we'll speak about what are the characteristics in the heart of the leader, and that will be the way. And then seeing the way, which is the vision. It's actually one of the most important lectures of all of them, because what characterizes the strongest leaders is actually the vision. Even more than speaking, there are many leaders, they didn't speak much. The Holy Virgin Mary, for example, we don't have a sermon recorded from her, except for the praise that she says and declares in the Gospel of St. Luke. But her leadership for all of humanity is a model for all of us. And we'll talk about discipleship and spiritual leadership, how we share the way with one another, and then finally, effective leadership and some characteristics. Most people, especially when you attend conferences on leadership or read many books, and there's many of them out there, Abuna and I were struggling through how to select, because actually it's not just for one conference or a subject for one lecture, but we were thinking even in the future of doing a series for our servants, for our future leaders, on different aspects of leadership. And I'm sure, I don't know, you probably already, maybe in your work or in your school, have taken Abuna. David, when we were in college, there's a whole course on leadership. So hopefully he will share some of the gems from that. So as we are accustomed, we have a short video that will introduce this lecture, and then hopefully there will also be some discussion afterwards and questions. motivation, they had a motivation of we want to, I think we can rule the world. You see one of those videos. But what we get to speak about Christ as the model for us. And then Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and God, and the Lord, bestow upon us His grace and His blessing, now and into the age of mercy. So Christ, He said, as we heard a few moments ago, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And He is the model for all leaders. And many times, in many books, even though I mentioned we're looking through a lot of these books and courses, you'll find bits and pieces or traces of Christ as the model leader. And in this time, we just want to reorient to see how much do we really use Christ as the model. We'll focus on 3 points. We'll speak about the absence of good leaders, which the video hinted towards. The world is always in need of more leaders. We'll talk about Christ as the model. And then finally, the calls for us and how we identify and recognize and respond to the call that God asks for us. So some people have a question mark or they're in the preparation stage where they've heard the call, but sometimes we forget it. So the last point will be hopefully a good source for us. So the absence of good leaders. The world is craving for good leaders. Not just now, as you know, we are in the age in politics in this next week. Right? which self-anointed saviors have rushed. And always, actually, no matter in most of the elections, when ask people what do you vote for, they ask us. Usually, there's a lack of motivation for some people. Some people are very eager to voice their opinions very loudly. But in general, Americans generally, at least the ones we interact with, they're unhappy. Like, we're waiting for leaders that we read about, that we heard about, that we experienced, or heard, and waiting for someone to take that position. And even when we think we found them, a few years later, we see, well, maybe it's not really. I'm not saying anything about one party than the next, but general trend. And even when you read in the histories, you'll find, even in American history, right, the love and the passion and the for the leaders of a nation were much stronger years ago than maybe today. Also, we find in religion, as Christ told us himself, the harvest is truly great, but the laborers are few. So we find always even a need in our churches for strong leadership. Not just for the priests, but even among the services, not just in Sunday school, but as a whole. So we find, ask any priest if we need servants, they will tell you not just one or two, but we need teams. Sometimes we are lamenting about a team of leadership. Someone was telling me in one of the other countries, all he has to do, if there's one of the youth going astray, he has a team. He calls on that team, they go and they work with him until they can bring them to the church and prepare them to sit with the women. That doesn't mean the woman doesn't go out, but he has a group that he can call on to help to get the lost sheep. In businesses, you'll find how many executives are people working in the business field. So corporate world, corporate America. It's not anyone is medicine, it's okay. And then what about service? How many people are serving in their church, Sunday school, or just because sometimes, and some people are shy to say what they do. It's okay. Hopefully by the end. So now we'll say something very important. Also in the world, we need leaders in the home, which the Bible tells us that the righteous man walks in his integrity, his children are blessed after him. The leadership begins, even when you look in the scriptures, at the very heart in the house. And Eli, God had punished him because although he was very righteous, but he didn't struggle in order to rule his family or to speak. He was shy in front of his own children to direct them in the way. As the scripture says, that they made his sons made themselves vile, and he did not restrain them. And God was asking him in order for that type of leadership. Samuel also was searching for the leader that God had chosen. And the people were pushing and rejecting, the type of leadership God wanted. God sent Samuel in order to anoint him the king. Although Samuel was very resistant in the beginning, he thought that the people of Israel should deserve a king and should accept the leadership or the means of leadership that God had designed originally. But then God said, well, if they want a king, we'll give them a king. And they chose for themselves, as you know, one of the story of Saul and David, and we will speak more about that in the rest of the few days here. Even David struggled with his own family, but in a righteous struggle, we see the example of how this was the way that because he was struggling for the unity of his family and the family of all Israel at the time, of the whole church. Some of the greatest leaders can conquer nations, but they even struggle at home. One of the famous, we're reading about John D. Rockefeller, as you know, very successful in his business. He was a tycoon and also a great philanthropist, but he had struggled his whole life in order to restore the relationship with his own daughter. And many of the great leaders, they have this struggle, which is actually a mark. The greatest leaders, it's not the cause for their difficulty at home, but actually a source sometimes driving the greatness of their own personal struggle. There are two trends you find in leadership, unfortunately not today. So now we have in the church, there's the business mentality which is entering. And it's not negative. There's actually many good things, and that's why we're talking about leadership in these days. There's a spiritual leadership which we need. But there are some, and we're reading that there are some, they focus only on, first on business and second on salvation. So there's an uncritical acceptance of what we need to do. Now, I don't know how many churches, our churches, this is just a warning for us in the future. So there are some churches, and that's why I'm reading about some of the other churches, they only focus on the amount of money they're bringing in, the amount of people they have, or the number of buildings that they're building, or they have the mega church model, and there's competition and rivalries and divisions, usually most clearly in the Western churches established here. But it's a warning for us. It's a warning for us to see that we don't fall prey to this trend. Or, as one of the books mentioned, there's a Disney World model. So what can we do to attract people, to do whatever we can to make it fun and enjoyable? It's in one sense it's good to attract people to Christ. We have to be very cautious about it. So, as someone said, we transformed from the Great Commission to mission statements only. I was in one of the conferences with Christian leaders in America, and they were preparing a statement about poverty, which is very important. One of the people in one of a big organization, Bread for the World, is just focused on providing food for poor families in America. He said a very powerful statement. I think he was the CEO, Vice President. He said, this is probably the third or fourth mission statement we have made in the past 4 years, but we haven't done anything to help the poor people as a whole, as Christian. And he was very clear and very precise, and actually, I was trying to, the leadership was just replacing Sayyidina and asked me to go so good. He said exactly, and we should be doing give a few examples of how we should be responding as church. But instead what happened, a few minutes later, they just went back to doing their mission statement. And they prepared another mission statement, or another statement, produced from the press, and our meeting is coming up against the next meeting in February, and so far, very little has been done. So there are some organizations like that. We like to talk, we like to speak, we like to put image, do a press release, and then actually the work was very little that was produced. Or that there's a shift between the altar to the office. Thank God, so far we don't have that. Most often we don't even have office hours, but there are some churches that the priest or the pastor, whatever, they go upstairs, leave. Most, as Sayyid tells, his office is the car, because he's always traveling to visit this church, this family. So, if we see that there's a shift between the time that we pray and in our altars at home, right, or the place, or our prayer room, or the place where we're spending much more time working, even our energy in that direction, instead of doing the shift, so that God really is first. There's another Christian business model that comes with businesses that are trying to appear to be more Christian. I don't know if you people in this will tell us. Your experience, if this is, there's, again, of course, some good to this, where Christian leaders are actually taking the forefront and trying to make their organizations honest and truthful and transparent. But there are some businesses that are doing this just to attract more business, not because they necessarily believe in the values that we believe in, or just taking an image that looks very good and attractive, but the essence is lacking. So this is the direction which some executives and leaders have drawn attention to. Some of the examples that you'll find, and these are just some of the many books that you'll find, and there's thousands of these out there. And one of the people who was writing the books said they asked us to go to conference after conference on leadership, and actually it's just a part of the routine. Whereas really the effect, because Christ is not clearly in some of the modelship that we have. It doesn't have to be that we're preaching in the office, or but really is the modelship. A few years ago, the book that came out, what would Jesus do? We've heard of the armbands and the shirts. Has anyone read the book? Or seen the book? It's a very powerful book that was written over 100 years ago, I believe. But the story begins, it's a true story, with a pastor who has this challenge to his congregation, saying that I need 10 volunteers that will come after the service to join this challenge. The challenge is very simple, that in all of their decisions they make in the next year, they have to ask themselves, honestly and faithfully, what would Jesus do in this situation? And they're obliged to go the whole way. Like if they think that Christ would leave their work, they have to leave their work. They sell their company, they sell their company. So it was a very big challenge, but 10 people came. I don't remember all of them. One of them was like a singer. One of them was the owner of a big newspaper press. Another one was construction. There's a number of different jobs. The only one that I recall, several years ago, it's not very fresh in my memory, but the one who was singing, she said, I can't. She was singing in different places, wherever they hire her, she goes. So after a while, she said, I can't go to this place, I can't go to that place. She said, she went to the pastor, after they used to have a meeting almost weekly or monthly afterwards to report on their progress. So by the end, she told the group, I can't stay in my work. What do I do? So they prayed about it, and afterwards she said, I have to leave her work. She began to sing in the church only. And the church found a way to support her. The one who was running the newspaper articles, he found a problem with the advertising. He said, I can't support all of these companies that are advertising in my newspaper, and they're not honest, reputable, Christian. So he started to eliminate them one by one. So his business, of course, the leadership started to decrease. And even the content of many of the newspaper articles, they were not Christian. So he, as the editor and owner, he had to cut it. So at the end, after a lot of prayer and reflection, he said, I had to change the whole newspaper from a regular newspaper to a Christian newspaper. And there were very few in that neighborhood, so actually it became successful. And the stories repeat. The important thing is that when they took seriously Christ as leading their life, and that decision, that honestly it would change our life if we were that faithful to say, well, I have to make that commitment. And they had a small group of people that they were accountable for those decisions. So sometimes we have a general policy, then it can go astray. It can be lost in the shuffle. And we have the pressures of life, or of work, or of the financial statements that come at the end, or the advisors that give us pressure, say, well, business is not doing well. We were just talking the other day about people who work in the restaurant industry, and we're pushing them, can you close on Sundays? It's not like someone's hiring you or firing you. Can you close on Sundays? And we beg some of them. The people who are faithful and honest, even to that they have many stories to tell of how God blesses them because they're faithful to the commandments of God. And it's a risk, it's a big business risk. And Abuna will tell us also about Chick-fil-A movement, how that's their policy, and they're very strict with it. And look, and it's one of the few, a few years ago, one of the people who invested in one of the restaurants in Los Angeles, he asked Abuna to go and bless it. And it's the first time I heard of what is another restaurant, and it's just another. And then after we started to investigate, whatever is going to bless it, because we made a special prayer, not just for the homes, but for this business. So anyways, when we began to investigate in the book about the owner of, you know his name? Anyways, I was very impressed by the model. It's a true Christian. Of course, many people have different opinions nowadays, especially. We'll talk about that later. But the question is, is Christ really the model for our decision making at work, or at school, or at home? And this is, I think, what is compelling us. I was wondering, let's say if you're at your work, if we polled the people around you that work with you, and we asked them, do you think that so-and-so follows, or is a model, and is responding to Christ's call in their life or not? Some may be very dissatisfied or very angry, they respond, but it should be clear for them. If we took the 5 things that we talked about, first one is assume, that's our lecture now. But we took just some of the points. This is a summary of a summary. In each one of these, there are many books written about it. So that's why we're not going to do it justice. This is just an introduction to them. We'll take the last 4 and we'll try to just see how Christ will be the model for these points of leadership. So about the character, about vision, about discipleship, and some effective qualities, we'll see how Christ truly can be the model for us. And once this is clear, then we can go into how we can apply these things for our life. So in terms of character and heart, when Christ was leading the disciples, many times there was the pressure for him to act in one certain way. And actually there was, in many places, an expectation that he would act in a certain way. And out of these challenges, come the mark of great leadership. Like the great leader is not because he has a certain title, or he's promoted, or he's paid a certain salary, although even if they have CEO, but really the great leaders are the ones that truly they affect others. There's an impact. There's some companies or positions that they can change from one to the next, and people working under them or with them may not find much of a difference. But true leadership, it's unmistakable. So Christ, in many of these circumstances, he says, in one occasion, he says, don't think that I will accuse you to the Father. There is one who accuses you, Moses, in whom you trust. This is one of the accusations against the Israelites, against the Jews, and scribes and Pharisees. Why was he saying this? He didn't waste his energy on some useless arguments or discussions of it. So he said, look, I'm not gonna waste energy and time in one direction when I know. But you look to Moses and see how he already accuses. Another example. When they were challenging the Lord, he said, St. Peter, he was saying, what about this man? He was speaking about St. John, who wouldn't die. So Christ tells him, look, if I will that he remains, so I thought, what is that to you? You follow me. Basically, he's telling him, look, there's a lot of questions you're not familiar about. Don't waste your time here. Why is that servant doing this? Or why is that person doing this? Of course, we have a motivation inside to bring on and to help whoever we can. But if we find ourselves even accusing from one disciple to the next, Christ says, look, follow me, and worry about other groups. One time St. Anthony also had that question. He said, how come people are suffering here? And how come people are so far from? How come you reward some people who are not faithful and honest? And God told St. Anthony, look, these questions, leave them to the side of me. Focus on the relationship with me. And many times, even in leadership positions or in our lives, we waste a lot of energy worrying and complaining or judging other people. So Christ had a very fine line. He didn't waste time on the demolition crew. He was always in the building phase. And he prepares the disciples for this. He said, look, I'm going to send you. They're not always going to accept you. They're not going to smile in your face. They're not going to say, oh, what a nice and gentle and honest and good Christian. It's the opposite. He said, you're going to go to cities, they're going to kick you out of the city. What did he tell them? He said, don't get angry, don't write petitions, don't go and complain to each other about what they did to you in Leicester and Derby or whatever. He said, well, shake the dust off your feet, go to the next city. And sometimes, when you look at the example of St. Paul, he went back into the city. He's not upset by it. So the good leader knows how to do that. Shake off the dust and continue working. We did it when I were discussing, there's a whole section about cynical leadership and how many times the good and positive and forward-looking leader, that you get to all, comes to a problem or difficulty and it takes out all the steam. And the devil is very good at bringing us, as Winsor Ken used to say, when I see the devil coming and fighting, I know that this is the way that I must go. So we press harder. We don't get discouraged. But all of us, we will be challenged. Believe me, and you know already, especially if you reach a higher position, the higher that you go in the more responsibilities that you take at work, or at school, or at church, you find more people complaining, or attacking, or questioning. So Christ said, this you should expect. Before Pontius Pilate, he also taught us that there's sometimes where we deal in silence. Sometimes that this is, what he said, the energy, it was safe to go to the cross. And there was a point where it didn't mean that he doesn't defend himself. He made his defense. But afterwards, when he said what he needed to say, he didn't waste his time with, and there's many people in church work and school and church, but there's a limit. So you feel like you're really losing yourself. One of the priests used to tell me in the beginning, when I first ordained, he told me, he said, there's going to come a time where you're going to get discouraged. So he said, what do you do? He said, when I do that, I leave everything, and I go. Actually, his church was on a mountain. He said, I go to the mountain, I go to the church, I just pray. And it was a very good reminder for me many times. You see when that pressure comes, we know where to go. So we talked about the model of Christ as a virtuous leader. This is some repetitions of the post. Then we'll go to the vision. We'll talk, as we said before, about the vision. And you'll see how Christ was fixed on vision. There are a lot of things to talk about later on, but like I said, this will just be a summary. The mission statement of the Lord, does anyone know where it comes or where he delivers the mission statement? In the ministry of the Lord Christ, what would you say is the mission? Am I not supposed to ask a question? You all the answers. Does anyone know where it comes? You think in the beginning or the end? It's an easy question. The mission statement. Christ has a mission statement. He does actually. It's very clear. It's a prophecy that comes. And there was a time when he was invited to synagogue to preach very early on in his ministry. And the custom was that you open the scriptures and you read a passage, like we do today, and you explain. And if there's a guest rabbi or teacher, a famous preacher, they would do that and they would preach. And sometimes the teacher would be able to select the reading. So, is it getting more familiar? So Christ enters, and he, in the Gospel of Luke, he takes this passage from Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me. This is the anointing, that's why he's called Christ. He has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. I'm sure for us, and sometimes we don't think in this way, but there are verses that are very clear and some people take as their mission statement. Actually, I should probably correct and say, reveal to them their mission statement. In the Roman Catholic Church, the Pope usually has a custom, I don't know how old it is, but they have a custom of taking a verse or two or a statement as their mission for the time which God gives them to be Pope in that era. I know our bishop, he also took one verse to bring all people perfect in Christ, and everybody in the diocese knows that this is the model. Sometimes when we want a new project or new work, we will fit this in the right place to say, this is how our project, our service, our retreat, whatever it is going to be in line with the vision of our leader, our father. And the same in hope we live in the new era of the Pope, our Father, the Father of Father and Shepherd of Shepherds, that also we will take a very clear vision that God reveals. And many times on the day of ordination, or at some point in his ministry, God will make it very clear. Usually it's in the beginning. Like say you're taking a new position, or you're going to marry someone new, and the time comes, maybe a few verses for that work, for that task, for that lifelong commitment will be clear. And it should be. Like there are many verses about love and family, but imagine how every family has, this is our mom, this is our vision, what God reveals to us for our life. And many times when we get weak or we have problems, we go to that and we turn to that and we say, oh, Christ, you told me this. You revealed to me this. It gives us that motivation. And we'll talk about that too, how leaders, especially in new positions, when they take on, say, a corporation, many of you will not be CEOs. Maybe you'll start your own organizations on the side after medicine or law or whatever you do, in the accounting, of course, that you will have on the side as a side project that will save the world. You can do accounting and dentistry and medicine and all of these things, but maybe you also have another project which many leaders actually have. Not that you can't save the world through your work, but maybe God also is preparing you for something else. There's one of the ladies, actually, she used to work at what was the name, title of her position? She was a secretary and administrator for a person. Basically, you know how the president has one secretary, the president, the main presidential secretary. She did that for a very big executive in Hollywood. And she would organize very big events that bring in a lot of money and income. That was her job, like dinners and all of these things. But God had revealed to her, she came across very poor children in the Los Angeles area. I'm sorry to give too many examples about Los Angeles, but this is what I'm most familiar with. And she went to places where she had heard many families just in Los Angeles, they don't have enough money to pay for shoes for their children. And she was so distraught by this. She said, like, maybe in Africa and third world countries, but in America, at that time, the 20th century, 21st century, and they don't have. So she started her own organization on the side. And actually now, I don't know how big it is, but it's very well known. So she actually used the talents that she was organizing for her boss and began to organize events for her charity, which actually reached We found about it through the radio. So there was an announcement on Christian radio and public radio for this. And to see that, I remember asking her, well, how did you get this? She said, many people, when they hear about my story, they want to just join and they want to help in any way they can. And I encourage them, but I tell them the same thing, that God may be calling you for something else. Yes, you want to follow, and we need your help in this project, but to copy just what I have done, maybe it's preventing you from discovering and from following what God is actually calling you to do. And this is what the best leaders will do. For Christ, the vision that he has was always towards the cross. So someone said, when I asked at the beginning or the end, in the beginning Christ puts his model. At the end of his ministry, when Christ is facing the cross, he reminds and emphasizes his vision so that it's clear for all the people in the organization, if you will. So the cross was not, as we know, not just for Christ, but for all. It was for all humanity before and after his position. So imagine like in your position, in your work, in your career, that you will be a model for people coming after you. And you guys say like in the Cynic Star, if you live the good Christian struggle, become a model of holiness. I don't know how many dentists we have in the Cynic Star, but maybe we need one. Right? So imagine, like even if say some people from certain diseases, they have certain diseases, that will find that, I think for every major disease, not just cancer or multiple sclerosis, that God is searching for saints among all of those, so that when anyone gets afflicted with that disease or illness, that they will have a saint that will support them and give them a good Christian model. And we say, well, they didn't have this disease in the 5th century. Well, that's why we need saints in every generation. That's why the saints are there to give us that motivation for leadership. They were leadership in the 3rd, 4th, 5th century, but we need today, in the 21st century, in Chicago, in New York, in Los Angeles, in our school in Indiana. They celebrated a few years ago the first saint from Indiana in the Catholic Church. And they have a building for her. She was like a nurse, and then she became a nun. Saint Liam, I believe it is. But anyways, whenever anyone is sick in the school, they go to the clinic. The clinic is named after her. So to see how they were very excited that they have a saint now from. So I think in Chicago, in Michigan, in Ohio, we need saints to go in the Cynic Star from this area. Yes, in Egypt, but also outside of Egypt. So this is the vision that Christ would emphasize about the cross. And he would say, when people tried to get him away from the vision, it was very, St. Peter, one of the greatest of the disciples, it was very clear, get behind me, I know my vision. I will not get distracted from what you wish. This is the be leader, right? In Gethsemane, when there is sweating blood, and faced with the very difficult decision, the leader has to accept because he knows we have to go in this direction. But after Gethsemane comes Golgotha, after Golgotha comes the resurrection. And the good leader knows, he knows we're going in this direction, and we have a cross in front of us. Who's going to take it and lead the disciples? It's for me. I carry that. I will carry this cross because I've been waiting for it my whole life. Or maybe I've been already carrying it for several years to reach the cross. I know this is awaiting me. The greater the sacrifice, the clearer the vision, the greater the leader. That's why the leaders are searching for sacrifice. They're not pointing to the people underneath them and telling them to carry the cross on their behalf. Like I'm sure after a while, when Simeon was carrying the cross with Christ, it says, after he's like, okay, I need a man. Yes, I shared with you for a time, just to give you the sweetness so later on you can see and tell others how it was to carry the cross. but this is mine. I'm taking it for all others. And there are many people, and you know them, in leadership positions, or you have a boss that just likes to give you all the work. And some of the worst bosses, you probably know from example, they don't do anything. They like to give to the people right under them, instead of training them, they give them all the work, and then they take all the credit. Right? Christ is the opposite. The good leader has the right vision. Yes, he shares she shares with others and lifts them up. This is the vision of good leadership. As we say, the vision should be shared from the boardroom to the restaurant. So people cleaning up even the toilets, and Abdelsayed told us a number of years ago that in his place in Amphora, he wants to make sure that the lady cleaning the toilets has the same vision as the person at the front desk or the priest that's in the. And this is what Christ did with the apostles, and we'll talk about how we can do it. But even to the end, he before going to the cross, he didn't leave them in doubt. He wanted to share his vision of the cross, what is going to happen, with all, so that no one was just surprised, saying, "Oh, that's what you're going to do." And then even when they forgot, he came to remind them again. Don't you know? Didn't I tell you? But sometimes when reading the Gospels, he said, "Didn't the disciples know that he's going to?" And he told them he's going to rise from the dead several times on the third day, and then they come on the third day as if nothing happened. So the good leader is clarifying the vision and reminding those about others about the vision. Whether it was very early on in John chapter 3, right, very beginning of the ministry, right after King of Galilee, or if it's at the very end with the apostles in Matthew chapter 12. Then we'll talk about discipleship. I'm too bored. Just go quickly. But this is one of my favorite lectures, also, of how Christ is asking us to follow him, and how the leader has the same authority as St. Paul says. We'll go through all of this first. As imitate me as I imitate Christ, so the leader in his or her workplace is saying the same. Saying that I'm doing this work, but as the position which God has entrusted me with, even wherever it may be, whatever city you may be in, and that I'm following. My vision is clear. And it's powerful and it's life-changing. So we'll ask in this lecture some questions to think about. Who are you directing? Or where are you taking them? What is God asking for you? Finally, we talk about effective leadership, and I think I don't want to get too distracted from this, but Christ, he gives many models of how the leader should be accessible, should be available. You didn't have to leave too many messages for Christ, but some people couldn't reach. Like Mary and Martha, I say this after take the time, but yeah, we can't always answer the phone. In this world, we are pressured to be always available. And media does help, but the good leader knows how to balance so that the phone doesn't take control of their life, or Facebook, or whatever, the emails even. You know that when Obama became president, one of the biggest withdrawal symptoms that he had to deal with was the BlackBerry. That was amazing. So he was so accustomed to responding very quickly to his BlackBerry, and his advisors told him, "You can't do this. It's a security risk. You have to shift it to the." And in the beginning, he insisted, but after a while, he listened to his advisors, and he had to. Because it's very difficult. You're not supposed to know where the president is, and anyone can trace it. It's very difficult. So, as leaders, we have to know where the line is, and it's very difficult, very, very difficult, especially for us as priests, to draw that line. And a lot of people are not happy. The other day, someone called me and said she couldn't believe that I answered the phone. I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, in our area." None of the priests answered, well, not here, it's another state. And even after I leave a message, It may be days. I'm like, usually that can happen with me too, but you caught me at a good time. She must have been praying. But sometimes for us as leaders, we have to know where the line comes. Or else we definitely will lose our time, our energy, and our focus. So we'll talk about this. Also, how to express ourselves in an effective way. This is the last. You said 1, 2, 3. The last one. What is the call to action? I have a question. I know you told me 90 minutes, but I didn't know when it ends. What? Okay. I have like 4 minutes. I think we can do it in 4 minutes, and that won't leave you too much time for questions. What? What? Yeah, but it's not my problem. It's not your problem. Are people born leaders? Are there born leaders? And actually, in some of the books, there's different opinions. Some people are born leaders. Is leadership learnable? Yes. Is it teachable? Yes. Okay, that's why we have it. We wouldn't be here if some people are not born. Maybe you are born. So what's the difference? Look at Christ's leadership. Someone said, well, I wasn't born. I'm not good at speaking. Or I'm not born from a wealthy family. Or I thought myself useless. I'm not like those other people that are great leaders. You look at Christ when his model of leadership, they called him useless from the beginning, right? Anything good come out. At Nazareth, he was not born in like New York City or wherever. And most of the biggest world leaders were born in unknown towns. Right? Not that Chicago's not or he didn't go to the famous schools and get the highest degrees. Actually, in the beginning, they're like, how can we even let him teach? Where did he study? He's not on the good man. You know, the other people, we don't have his resume doesn't fit in this place, right? He was not. This is all in earthly terms. Of course, we know that Christ, in each one of these, He's the author. He is the wisdom, right? He is the one who gives us hope. So all of these are in worldly terms, right? Poor, definitely, he was poor. But he lived poor, he was rich, and he made others rich, right? In the right way. When you look at the comparison between Saul and David, because if people want a leader, they pick the tallest one, the strongest one. That's a leader, that's a king. We need that guy, right? You know from the rest of the book what happened, right? And then when God calls David, you see, he doesn't look like Saul. Or used to, in the presidential elections for a long time, and I think this trend actually died out. But I remember when we were studying a number of years ago, not too long, a number of years ago, they compared the height of all the president the people who are running for president in the debates. That's when you come down to the final two. And they found out that the pattern was almost consistent with the taller president would usually win. It's before technology, now we don't even know because you might not even need it. But in that time, they would say, a taller president, whoever's taller is going to win. I don't know who's taller. Not the same. But this trend, I think, at least after they taught us, it didn't seem to match. But for a number of years, this is what they look for, the taller, the stronger, the one who's most eloquent. But actually, the best leaders are not necessarily so. Right? And God loves to flip this equation, to pick the weak, the people that are not expected to win. That's why we like, especially in America, we like the underdog to win. And God, in His way, loves to do that. That's why when He called the apostles, yes, He picked some of the educated, some of the wealthy, but He liked to shock, for the shock value. Say, well, how is this guy? He was just catching fish the other day, right? He didn't learn all the things that we exactly, because his success is now attributed to the Lord Christ. Fine. Call to action. There are 3 ways that God calls us: through the burning heart, the burning bush, and the burning house or the city. Very quickly. So the first one, the burning heart, which is the zeal that God has within us, and the passion is guiding the leadership. Not that leaders are just emotional and react to anything. Those are actually very dangerous leaders. So, go walk. Yes, how do they do? Or attack. No, it's the passion that's driving their leadership. That's why Christ says, I wish you were cold or hot. I need people who are zealous, 100%. So sometimes God calls us to leadership through that passion, that desire. And someone says, how come they're doing this? Why is this problem existing? It should be solved. We find those people after a while. In one of the books, there was a lady who had this passion in one of the conferences, and she was saying, look at all these problems of organization. She began to speak from that. She just spoke up once because they were asking for feedback. Within a month, she became the leader of the organization. She didn't plan it. She didn't think she could be the leader. But because of her passion, her heart, God called her to the second one, which is David, the prophet, as his example for the same. When Goliath, when being oppressed by Goliath, God touches the heart of David. He said, how come you're letting this guy defame the people of God and God himself? How come nobody's acting? And he had no answer. And then he kept asking one after the next. He said, they're just waiting. How long have you been waiting for someone to respond? So then, of course, he wants to, and he says, I'll go. And no hesitation. And he began to say, look what God did with me with the lion and the bear. And after a while, when he was so persistent because his passion was very clear, and God instills him and confirms that vision for him. After a while, what did he say? The people, even the king, begins to take his son and says, nobody has this passion. You must be the one. Right? So by the end, Saul says, go, and the Lord will be with you. That's the first. Now we have the burning bush, which is an individual and direct call. It's different from the burning heart. The burning heart comes from within. The burning bush, it's obvious. Bush is not burning. It was a very clear call that God made directly and only to him. It's not like Goliath was around and there's a common problem. There was a problem with Pharaoh for many years, but because of the burning bush, there was a change. So it's a clear purpose and vision that God reveals. And even in the beginning, Moses is resistant. So he doesn't have the burning heart in the beginning. Yes, he wants the people of Israel to be saved. But he himself doesn't want to go. Actually, he gives every excuse for him not to be the one. And God was patient with him in the end, but by the end, when he leaves the burning bush, he knows, I have no choice, I'm going. Like, this is what God wants, and this is what God wants. And in our life, depending sometimes by personality, I think the people that you know, the born leaders, more usually for the burning heart. Usually, not necessarily, but usually they fall in that category. The ones maybe more in terms of trained or learned leadership, more in terms of this, like the call that God asked them, usually by a burning bush. And then finally we have the burning house, the burning city, which you find a good example in Nehemiah, when the city was literally burning in Israel. And he was distraught just at the messages that were happening around. And of course it's related to the first one, like his passion, his heart was for the reestablishment of Israel. But the more that he heard about the burning of the city, we have to do something. The same for Queen Esther. Same for the Queen Esther. Yes, she had the burning heart, but at the same time, because the people of Israel were also in the same affliction. And it was such a grave disaster that God needed a leader, and even he spoke, right, clearly to her, saying, don't think in your heart that you will escape from the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And sometimes it's not necessarily in her heart. Maybe she didn't have, she had a passion for her people, but it definitely didn't call her to act. And in the second case, there was no necessarily burning bush. God didn't speak through a burning bush for her, but he sent someone very clear to tell her, very clear, in her face, this is what God is calling you to do, and if you don't do it, he's going to find someone else. But really, we're starting you're here for this. And God will send us the same messages and plain messages. So, I'll give you some homework to do. When you ask what is God calling you to do tonight, and hopefully by the end of the retreat, to spend just a half an hour, answering these 3 questions. You can do it early in the morning, you can do it late at night, you can do it in the middle of the day in the free time, but you'll have quiet time tomorrow for something else. But this, if you, sometimes when people get really stuck in their life and they have to make a major decision, try to tell them to take a retreat on their own just to cover these 2 questions. And you'll know 10 minutes are not enough. We actually did this, I think, at the high school, so they got it a little bit early. If you answer very 3 simple questions, but you want to go to them in a very deep way. Ask yourself, who is God to you? Not just in the Bible. You can start with titles of who God is. But try to go deeper, and you say, Abdelsayed, and you'll go through the general titles. And then go deeper to see, really, the personality of God is dealing with you. The titles maybe that you give him. And sometimes, when you love someone very much, you might give them nicknames, but not, and something very close is God. You see that even with, like, you have a favorite title of God. There are over 100 names and titles for God. And maybe of all of them, you may pick a couple that really speak to you. And this is very important. It's actually the most important question and the hardest one. Second, you'll ask, who are you? And you can start again with the regular titles and what you do and what your degrees are. But when you go deeper, you'll find and discover a lot more. Some people will ask also who they want to be, and just wants and desires. And then finally, what do you think, or what can you feel that God is calling you to do, He's already called you to do? But to make it very clear. If you're not sure, that's exactly what you keep asking. and that time is spent in prayer, and asking God, many times as leaders, we're already called to tell them when we're younger, very young, it's like, yeah, mostly because of you guys, everyone wants to be school. Not everyone. No. Of course, that's too late for most of us. All of us are living. But you see that God called you to certain things, but even after He's called you to certain positions, the leader, the God is still always asking, okay, now what's next? And that vision, that question, will always be asking number 3. Hopefully this will give us a better perspective for us, and then sorry, it's too long.